Spider-Man 2 was easily my most anticipated game of 2023, and upon my first playthrough, it did not disappoint. I immediately gave the game a 9.5 out of 10, citing the fact that I felt it was an improvement upon its predecessor in pretty much every way. The combat felt faster, the story pacing felt more engaging, the boss battles and set pieces felt far more bombastic. The web swinging allowed for so much more freedom, and it had a steeper learning curve, making more difficult maneuvers so much more satisfying when you got the hang of them. But something happened after the credits rolled on Spider-Man 2, especially after a week passed. I found that the game just wasn't sticking with me. And for me, this isn't really normal. Every Arkham game stuck with me long after the credits rolled, as did Insomniac's first two Spider-Man games, as do the BioShock games, as do Crystal Dynamics' Tomb Raider games. I'm someone who really likes to ponder what I've just played for weeks after I've completed a new game for the first time, but with Spider-Man 2, it instantly felt forgettable. At first I thought that maybe it was just the consequence of being a busy adult. I have a full-time job, I'm married, I have other familial responsibilities, and so maybe I was the one in the wrong headspace to experience this game, so I played it again. And once again, I was astounded by the attention to detail during the Sandman encounter. I had so much fun chasing Lizard as I was wearing the symbiote. I really enjoyed the complexity of the Kraven boss fight. I was moved as the Spider-Men fought and Peter's ideologies had shifted because of his corruption. I really liked how Miles and Martin Lee concluded their rivalry. I thought that the Venom boss fight was challenging and really climactic, and then, once again, the credits rolled and I almost instantly forgot the game. So I waited for a number of months before booting up the game to play it again, this time on New Game Plus, but this time I didn't let the story suck me into its fun set pieces and chases and boss fights. This time I really paid attention to the stakes and the consequences and the themes of the story. I really tried to dissect why this game comes across as so forgettable, and I think I figured it out. But before I get too deep into that, I want to reaffirm that I think Spider-Man 2 is great. So many aspects of this game I think are in the 9 or 9.5 out of 10 range. I also think it's worth noting that none of these criticisms really matter when I'm actively playing through the game. It's only after the credits roll that I can look back and nitpick. The game is so successfully, consistently fun that you're not thinking through the game's issues when you're playing it. But there are issues, and I really do think they're the reason that the game comes across as forgettable. And no, it's not just that the final cutscene is happy. I've seen a number of video essayists and people on social media make the case that this final cutscene is just too much of a happy ending, whereas Spider-Man 2018's final cutscene was Aunt May dying. Except it wasn't. The final cutscene of Spider-Man 2018 before credits rolled was Peter and MJ sharing a kiss in a diner. Moments before the final cutscene of Spider-Man 2, Harry slips into a coma, much like how Aunt May died moments before the final cutscene of the first game. The final moments of these games aren't what define the staying power of them, but they are a good measurement of determining how effectively the story conveyed its stakes and themes. The first game ends with Peter Parker having inadvertently helped Otto Octavius become Doc Ock. Doc Ock is taken to the raft knowing Peter Parker's identity and clearly wanting revenge. At the beginning of the game, he and Peter were allies, friends even, and that is no longer the case. Something has changed and it is irreversible. Aunt May, Peter's final living relative, passes away because he's unwilling to sacrifice the rest of the city to save her. He knows that he has to do what a hero would do no matter how hard it is. Something has changed, and it's irreversible. Miles has a character arc which has been initiated by the death of his father at the hands of Martin Lee. Something has changed, and it is irreversible. These characters have gone through something, and so even though the story concludes and the heroes win, they've all lost something along the way. Peter and MJ's relationship, which was rekindled during the course of this game, seems like it's on a good track. It concludes with them back together after having started the game separated. The game also teased a really compelling sequel. It showed Harry in a tank with the symbiote. It showed that Miles had been bitten by a spider. It showed that Norman Osborn had the capability to become the Green Goblin. And while I certainly wouldn't call Spider-Man from 2018 a perfect game, I certainly had some issues, particularly with the pacing of the story. It was a successful journey that showed us a lot about the characters. It invested us in their world and their story. Now let's look at how Spider-Man 2 concludes. The game ends after Peter has taken off the symbiote suit. While under the influence of the symbiote suit, he worked to essentially alienate everyone he holds dear. He was a complete jerk. But nothing was irreversible. As soon as he took it off, he was promptly forgiven and able to move on without consequence. He takes a break from being Spider-Man. Notice how he doesn't retire. He doesn't definitively say he's done. It's a very safe way of letting Miles take the reins for a while until the story conveniently finds a way for Peter to come back. How much more effective would this ending have been if Peter was quitting being Spider-Man because he was racked with guilt? What if he had brutalized Dr. Connors to the point of paralysis? What if he had killed Kraven the Hunter? What if he had become so hell-bent on stopping another Otto Octavius from emerging that he had become the new Otto Octavius? The game ends with Harry Osborn in a coma. He's not dead, and he's not alive. It feels like the safest and least ballsy decision that they could have made. But even if Harry had met his end at the end of Spider-Man 2, I don't know that that would have fixed the issue. While the game did a good job of setting up the fact that Peter cared for Harry and had been friends with him, it didn't successfully engage me with Harry in an empathetic manner. For much of the game, I was playing as Miles Morales, who's starting to feel like a third wheel because of Harry. So as a player, I almost resented him more than I cared for him. He didn't join the ranks of Genki, Aunt May, Otto Octavius before he became a villain, Martin Lee before he became a villain, or the other characters that I'm really endeared to in this universe. The game ends with the city overcoming an alien invasion of symbiotes and not really being affected by it. The city is completely intact and the citizens seem completely fine. The game once again teases that Norman Osborn could become the Green Goblin, and that's pretty much how the game ends. It feels really obligatory in a lot of cases, which is strange. A story about Kraven, the symbiote, and Venom should not feel like a filler issue. This game should have taken a lot of risks. Heck, risks were the reason I was so excited to play it. Because there were two playable Spider-Men, the symbiote arc could have gone so much further than we've seen it generally portrayed in media before. Peter Parker could have become an outright villain, maybe even Venom, and Miles would have had to take him down. The potential for characters like Kirk Connors and Felicia Hardy was at an all-time high, but both of them were sorely underutilized in the story. It also doesn't help that on the rare occasions that this game does take a major risk, such as turning MJ into Scream, the sequence is over as soon as it begins. The conflict between MJ and Peter feels paper-thin, and it just feels like a missed opportunity. If MJ had become Scream for the entire third act of the game, there are so many interesting missions and sequences and character beats that the game could have hit, but instead it is resolved after one single boss fight. Part of the problem is that Harry Osborn had so much character arc to go through in such a brief game that there wasn't tons of time for anything else. Harry starts off as being introduced as Peter's friend. The game very quickly tries to make him a likable ally. Then he has superpowers, and it does a very brief superhero origin story for effectively Harry as Agent Venom. Then he transfers the symbiote to Peter halfway through the game, which feels like a long time to wait to get to experience the symbiote, but a very brief time to build up all of Harry's development with the symbiote before giving it to Peter. Then Harry grows increasingly sick and resentful of Peter until he gets the symbiote back and becomes Venom at the 75% point of the story. Once again, this feels really early for Peter to get the symbiote off. It makes this whole arc of Peter wearing the symbiote and being corrupted by it only account for 25% of the story. At the same time, though, it feels way too late for Harry to just now be getting established as the main villain. The story asks a lot of Harry over the course of just one game, and really it's more like the story is demanding that he go through all of this development in half a game because the other half is relegated to Miles Morales, who isn't very directly intertwined with Harry Osborn's story. In all honesty, Miles Morales has the more interesting story here. He's faced with the escape of Martin Lee, the man who killed his father. He's torn between trying to maintain justice as Spider-Man and wanting cold-hearted revenge on this killer. I found myself more invested in Genki and Haley as supporting characters than I did MJ and Harry. I also felt that this would have been a far more suitable plot for the character to get the symbiote. If Miles had donned the symbiote, it could have influenced his desire for revenge and twisted and corrupted him based on that. Don't get me wrong, the Miles Morales segments of the story aren't perfect. The game, for some reason, really wants to establish that this is a passing of the torch story, that Miles Morales is going to be the new leading Spider-Man going forward. And I don't have a problem with that, other than I feel like we kind of already saw that in the previous game. In Spider-Man Miles Morales, I felt that Miles had effectively become an equal partner of Peter Parker. The whole subplot of him not being able to figure out how to write a 500-word college essay felt kind of meaningless, and there wasn't much of a payoff to it in the story. While I had a lot of fun getting to play as both Spider-Man over the course of a single game, the story didn't feel longer to accommodate having two characters with complete arcs on their own. I can't help but wonder if focusing on only one of them would have made for a stronger plot. I don't want to be too harsh on Insomniac, though. I know they had to cut a ton of this game. Tony Todd has gone on record saying that only about 20% of his lines as Venom made it into the finished game. We've learned that there was going to be a Venomized Sandman. We learned that at one point, Miles Morales was in fact going to don the symbiote suit. And man, if any game out there deserves a director's cut, I think this is it. I wouldn't be surprised if we learned that about 50% of this game's story had to be either trimmed or cut entirely in order to ship the game on time and on budget. It seems like the devastating leak that Insomniac underwent perhaps also really wrecked their plans for releasing a City That Never Sleeps style DLC, which also I think helped the staying power of that initial game. And maybe I'm misreading this, but it seems like Brian Intahar's passion project is the story that was set up for Spider-Man 3. He said in a number of interviews that Doc Ock is his favorite villain, and that he's been dreaming of using that final post-credits cutscene of Dr. Octavius plotting his comeback since the inception of the first game. So perhaps Spider-Man 2 was unintentionally a filler issue to set up what comes next, and I can only hope that Spider-Man 3 is a story that takes more risks and has higher stakes. Before I end, I do want to reiterate that I love Spider-Man 2. I think it's probably within the top 5 superhero video games ever developed. Everything from traversal to combat to stealth capabilities and much more is so well done. The pacing of the story is always engaging, filled with set pieces and fun boss fights. But at the end of the day, though the game tries to preach balance as its theme, it's a game that doesn't focus on balance. It's a game that has a story that is woefully unbalanced and, at the end, forgettable. And despite how much I love the game, I can't help but feel a little disappointed. It had all the right ingredients to be the perfect Spider-Man game, but it feels underbaked. And no matter how good the ingredients are, if they're left underbaked, then they'll never reach their full potential. And unfortunately, Spider-Man 2 simply didn't reach its full potential. The game ends narratively in a very similar spot to where it began, where very little changed and very little was irreversible. Thank you all so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments below what you think about Spider-Man 2, particularly its story, and we'll see you guys in the next one.